The first thing I learned after waking up was not my name, or the date, or even how close I had come to dying. It was that while I had been unconscious in a hospital bed, with tubes in my throat and machines breathing for me, my aunt had handed the hospital a document that said I wanted them to stop keeping me alive. My name is Mara Farrow. She did not whisper it in a moment of grief. She did not misunderstand something I had signed years earlier. She submitted a formal advance medical directive, complete with a signature that was supposed to be mine, and she used it to argue that my life support should be withdrawn before my doctors believed my condition was hopeless. The only reason I am alive to tell this story is that the hospital's own records did not match the paper she brought in. Before the accident, I was 34 years old, living in Ohio, working as a project coordinator for a commercial construction firm, and trying to build the kind of quiet, stable life that does not make for dramatic family stories. I was not rich. I was not famous. I did not have some sprawling estate that made relatives circle like predators. I had a townhouse with a mortgage, a modest retirement account, a life insurance policy through work, some savings, and a basic estate plan I had put together after my father died because watching my mother deal with paperwork during grief had frightened me into being practical. I named my mother Elena as my primary beneficiary and decision maker. I named my younger cousin Callie for a few backup items, and buried in one contingent line because my attorney had asked for someone beyond my mother in the unlikely event she was gone too, was my Aunt Denise, my mother's older sister. At the time, it meant almost nothing to me. Aunt Denise had always been dramatic and difficult, but she was family. She came to birthdays, she sent Christmas cards. She called my mother every Sunday and complained about money, neighbors, doctors, taxes, and anyone who had failed to appreciate her. I did not adore her, but I never imagined she would look at my unconscious body and see an opportunity. The accident happened on a wet Tuesday evening in March. I remember leaving work late, the yellow reflection of traffic lights in the rain, and a white pickup drifting across the center line. Then there is nothing. No impact, no pain. Just a clean black gap where several days of my life should have been. What I know now is what others told me later. A driver lost control on a slick road and slammed into the driver's side of my car. The door folded inward. My head hit hard enough to cause swelling and bleeding. My ribs broke. One lung collapsed. I was taken to St. Bernadette Medical Center, where surgeons stabilized me, placed me on a ventilator, and told my mother the first 48 hours would matter most. My mother stayed beside me almost constantly. She slept in a chair. She kept a notebook of every medication, every pressure reading, every phrase the doctors used. My best friend Priya came and brought clean clothes. My cousin Callie drove in from Columbus. Denise arrived on the second day with a travel mug, a big purse, and the kind of trembling performance my mother later described as grief with an audience. She cried loudly in the waiting room. She told nurses she had helped raise me, which was not true. She asked my mother if I had a will, which my mother dismissed at first because grief makes people say strange things. Then Denise began asking whether I had ever signed anything about machines. My mother told her truthfully that I had talked about not wanting to be kept alive forever with no hope, but that we had never completed a formal advance directive. I had been meaning to do it. I had even downloaded information from the hospital website once after a colleague's husband got sick, but I never signed one. I never notarized one. I never gave one to anyone. I never put one on file with St. Bernadette. That detail became the hinge of the entire story. On the fourth day after my accident, my condition was still critical, but not hopeless. The swelling in my brain had not worsened. My oxygen levels had improved. My trauma surgeon, Dr. Shah, told my mother there were reasons to be cautious, but also reasons to keep fighting. He said the next several days could show whether I was beginning to turn a corner. My mother wrote in her notebook, possible improvement, no decision today. That same afternoon, Denise approached the nurse's station and said she had found something important at her house. She claimed I had left a signed advance directive with her 2 years earlier after a family dinner, because I supposedly trusted her to make sure my wishes were respected if my mother became too emotional. My mother later told me that when she first heard this, she did not explode. She did not call Denise a liar. She simply felt cold. It was possible, in the abstract, that I had signed something and forgotten to mention it. It was possible I had talked to Denise during one of the many family gatherings where end-of-life topics came up after my father's death. My mother knew better than to assume what she wanted to believe, so when the hospital's ethics committee became involved, she listened. The committee was not some shadowy group making secret decisions. It was a group that reviewed complicated care questions when documents, family wishes, and medical facts did not line up neatly. A social worker named Teresa met with my mother and explained that Denise had submitted a document claiming to be my advance medical directive. It appeared to authorize withdrawal of mechanical ventilation and other extraordinary measures under circumstances. Denise argued applied to me. But there was an immediate problem. St. Bernadette's electronic records showed no such directive on file before Denise walked in with it. That alone did not prove fraud. People keep documents at home all the time. But the form looked oddly familiar to one of the hospital administrators. The layout resembled a newer template. St. Bernadette had only adopted recently, not one from the date printed near my supposed signature. Teresa told my mother, carefully, that the hospital could not ignore a signed legal document, but it also could not rely on a document whose authenticity was reasonably questioned. My mother asked to see it. She later described standing in a small consultation room, holding a copy of the paper in both hands, staring at my name written at the bottom. Mara El Ferro. The signature looked close. Not perfect, not childish, not an obvious fake. Close enough that a tired person might accept it. But my mother had seen my handwriting since kindergarten. She knew the way I made the capital M, with the second peak slightly lower than the first. On the directive, both peaks were nearly identical. She knew my R usually leaned forward. On the directive, it stood stiff. She knew I never used my middle initial unless a legal form forced it, and even then I tended to write Marafero first and squeeze the L in later. On that page, the whole signature looked too deliberate, too copied, too careful. My mother told Teresa, "I cannot say under oath that Mara did not sign this, but I can say it does not feel like her." Teresa advised her to speak with an attorney immediately. That is how Priscilla Nakamura entered my life. Priscilla was not a family friend or a dramatic television lawyer. She was a calm, precise elder law and medical decision attorney, recommended by someone in my mother's church. My mother called her from the hospital hallway, voice shaking, and said, "My daughter is unconscious, and my sister just produced a paper saying she should be taken off life support." Priscilla did not waste time. She asked for the document, the date of admission, who had legal priority, whether I had a healthcare power of attorney, whether the hospital had already acted, and whether anyone was pressuring staff for a quick decision. My mother answered as best she could. Priscilla told her not to accuse Denise in front of hospital staff yet. She said, "We need facts fast. If the document is legitimate, we have to know that. If it is not, we have to prove it before anyone treats it as controlling." Within hours, Priscilla arranged for a forensic document examiner named Hugh Larkin to review the directive. Hugh had spent decades analyzing signatures, ink, printing patterns, and document timelines for civil and criminal cases. Because time mattered, he worked from high-resolution scans first and requested the original as soon as the hospital's legal department could secure it. My mother gave him examples of my real signature from my driver's license paperwork, mortgage documents, old tax forms, employment forms, and birthday cards I had signed for my grandmother. Priya brought over a stack of my handwritten notes from my desk, including meeting notebooks full of my ordinary writing, the kind no one performs because no one expects it to matter. While Hugh worked, the hospital paused any decision based on Denise's paper. My medical team continued the care plan they believed was appropriate. Denise was furious about that. My mother said Denise paced the waiting room and kept asking why everyone was dragging this out when Mara made her wishes clear. She used my first name constantly, as if repetition made her sound intimate. She told my cousin Callie that my mother was being selfish. She told a nurse that Elena never could let go of anything. She said, "Mara would hate being trapped like this." The cruelty of that line still settles in me sometimes. I was not trapped. I was injured. I was fighting to breathe with medical help while my brain swelling slowly improved. There is a difference between a hopeless body being forced to linger and a living person needing time. Denise wanted that difference erased because a forged paper said so. My mother nearly confronted her then, but Priscilla told her to wait for the analysis. Those hours were agony for my family. My mother sat beside me and watched the ventilator rise and fall. Priya read messages from coworkers out loud, even though no one knew if I could hear. Callie brought coffee and cried in the parking garage where my mother could not see. Everyone was suspended between fear of losing me and fear that my own aunt had tried to hurry that loss along. Meanwhile, my actual medical indicators were not moving in the direction Denise implied. My oxygen support was slowly decreasing. A follow-up scan showed no new bleeding. Dr. Shah told my mother that if the trend held, they might try reducing sedation soon. My mother wrote in her notebook, "Improving, still serious." She underlined improving 3 times. Hugh's preliminary findings came back late that night. He called Priscilla first, and Priscilla came to the hospital to explain everything in person. My mother, exhausted and hollow-eyed, sat across from her in a family consultation room while Teresa from the ethics committee joined by phone. Hugh had found several problems. The signature on the directive showed characteristics consistent with tracing or slow simulation. In plain language, someone had tried to copy my signature from another document. Natural signatures have rhythm. They speed up and slow down in ways that reflect habit, not hesitation. Mine usually had smooth pressure changes and a quick lift before the final O. The directive signature had tremors in places where a genuine signature should have flowed. It also had unnatural pen pressure at curves, as if the writer was carefully following a model. That was bad enough. Then came the template problem. The document claimed I had signed it 2 years earlier, on June 18, but the form used language and formatting from a St. Bernadette Advanced Directive packet that had not been released until the following year. A revision code in tiny print at the bottom of the page matched the newer template. Hugh checked archived versions and confirmed that the older form looked different. The paper Denise submitted could not have existed in that form on the date it claimed to have been signed. There were also metadata clues in the scanned copy Denise had emailed to the hospital. She had said she found the document in an old folder, but the scan appeared to come from a recently created PDF generated on a home printer scanner model registered to a consumer line released after the supposed signing date. Hugh was careful. He did not say Denise herself forged it in that first report. He said the document was not authentic as dated, and the signature was highly questionable. For hospital purposes, that was enough to stop it from governing my care. For my mother, it was the moment shock turned into something sharper. Her sister had not found a forgotten document. Someone had created one. Someone had used my name, my medical fear, and my unconscious body as ingredients in a plan. Priscilla immediately contacted hospital administration and formally challenged the directive. She presented Hugh's findings, my lack of prior directive on file, my mother's legal status as next of kin, and the medical team's current prognosis. The hospital's legal counsel agreed the directive would not be treated as valid unless a court ordered otherwise, which nobody had grounds to seek. My care continued. I remained sedated, ventilated, and unaware that paperwork had nearly become a weapon. But Priscilla did not stop at invalidating the document. She told my mother, "The urgent medical issue is one track. The question of motive is another. If Denise fabricated this, we need to understand why, because hospitals and authorities will ask." My mother hated that word, motive. It made the whole thing sound like a crime story, and she still wanted, somewhere deep down, for there to be an explanation that did not require seeing her sister as a person capable of this. Maybe Denise had been fooled. Maybe someone else had given her the form. Maybe she had misunderstood an old conversation and panicked. But Priscilla had seen enough family disputes around illness to know that ugly behavior often has a ledger behind it. She recommended a private investigator named Marisol Vance. Marisol was a former insurance fraud investigator, direct without being cold. She met my mother in the hospital cafeteria the next morning, drinking black coffee and taking notes on a yellow legal pad. She asked who benefited from my death, who had access to my documents, who knew about my estate plan, who had money problems, and who had been pressing for decisions. My mother said, "Nobody benefits enough to do something like this." Marisol replied, "Enough is different for everyone." That sentence stayed with my mother, and later with me. Marisol's work over the next 2 days was painfully practical. She reviewed public court records. She checked property liens. She looked at bankruptcy filings, civil judgments, and online fundraiser histories. She spoke with Priscilla about my estate documents, and confirmed that Denise was listed as a contingent beneficiary in a limited but real way. She would not receive everything automatically if I died. My mother was first in line for most assets. But there were scenarios, depending on timing, payable on death designations, and one older life insurance beneficiary form I had forgotten to update, where Denise could collect money if my mother disclaimed something, predeceased me, or if certain accounts passed through the contingent structure. More importantly, Denise seemed to believe she stood to gain more than she actually would. Marisol found emails Denise had sent to a financial counselor months earlier, complaining that family money was tied up, and saying that her niece had no children and no real obligations. "My niece is practical," Denise wrote in one message. She would not want assets wasted on machines. Reading that later made my stomach turn. Assets wasted on machines. The machines were my ventilator, my monitors, my IV pumps. The asset was my life. Marisol also found that Denise was drowning financially. She had credit card judgments. She was behind on her mortgage. Her car was at risk of repossession. She had borrowed from friends and stopped answering them. None of that by itself made her a forger. Desperate people do not automatically become monsters. But it built context around her sudden insistence that a document existed, around her questions about my will, around her anger when the hospital hesitated. Then Marisol found the access point. 2 months before the accident, Denise had helped my mother clean out my grandmother's old house. My mother had brought several boxes of family papers home, and, because she was overwhelmed, left some in her dining room for sorting. I had stopped by one Sunday and signed a form related to transferring an old savings bond that had belonged to my grandmother. Denise was there. She could have seen my signature. She could have taken or photographed the page. Hugh later concluded the forged Directive signature likely had been modeled from that savings bond form because the unusual spacing matched. Denise had not needed access to my private files. She only needed one real signature and enough determination to misuse it. My mother confronted Denise on the 7th day after my accident. By then, my sedation had been reduced slightly, and I had shown signs of purposeful movement. When a nurse asked me to squeeze her hand, I did it once. It was not a full awakening, but it was enough to make the room breathe again. My mother cried over that one squeeze. Denise did not. According to Callie, Denise stood at the foot of my bed, looking pale and angry, as if my fingers moving had personally offended her. My mother asked her to step into the family room. Priscilla had advised my mother not to interrogate Denise without a witness, so Callie came too. My mother placed a copy of the Directive on the table. She said, "I know this is not real." Denise immediately began shaking her head. She said my mother was emotional, that grief was clouding her judgment, that I had trusted Denise because I knew my mother would keep me alive no matter what. My mother let her talk. Then she said, "The form did not exist on the date Mara supposedly signed it. The signature was traced. The hospital is rejecting it. Priscilla is reporting it." Denise stopped. Callie told me later the silence was the worst part because it was the first honest thing Denise had done. My mother asked, "Did you make this?" Denise said, "You do not understand." My mother said, "Then explain it." That was when Denise began to unravel. She did not give one clean confession at first. She circled it. She said I had always been independent and would hate being helpless. She said doctors keep people alive for money. She said my mother was selfish. She said families go broke over false hope. My mother said, "Mara's insurance is covering her care, and her doctors say she is improving." Denise snapped. "For now." Then she started crying, not loudly this time, but with a small, furious desperation. She admitted she had made the document after finding a blank form online. She claimed she only did it because she knew what I would want. When my mother pushed on the date discrepancy, Denise said she had used a newer form because it looked official and no one would accept a handwritten note. When Callie asked how she signed my name, Denise said she had a copy of something I signed at Grandma's house and practiced until it looked close. She said the words as if describing a chore. Practiced until it looked close. My mother asked the question that cut through every excuse. "Were you trying to have my daughter taken off life support?" Denise said, "I was trying to spare everyone." My mother said, "Spare everyone or pay your debts." And Denise went rigid. Callie had not known about the money problems yet, but my mother had learned enough from Marisol to say it. Denise denied it, then admitted she was behind, then insisted that any money issue was separate. But she also said, "What good would it do Mara if she never woke up?" That was the line that ended any remaining sisterhood my mother felt in that room. My mother stood and said, "She is waking up. And even if she were not, you do not get to forge her voice." Denise left the hospital that afternoon and was not allowed back into my room. Priscilla documented the confrontation while memories were fresh. Callie wrote her own account. Teresa updated the ethics committee file. Hospital security was notified that Denise was not authorized to receive information or visit. The fraudulent directive was preserved as evidence. Priscilla formally invalidated it in writing with hospital administration, attaching Hugh's report and demanding that any future documents from Denise be treated as suspect. She also notified the appropriate state authorities and advised my mother to file a police report. My mother hesitated for about 10 minutes. Then she looked through the glass at me, still hooked to a ventilator but alive, and signed whatever needed signing. People sometimes imagine accountability arrives with sirens and courtroom speeches. In my case, it arrived as paperwork. Reports, certified letters, chain of custody notes, statements from doctors explaining my prognosis at the time the directive was submitted. Hugh's final forensic report, Marisol's financial timeline, Priscilla's legal memo. My mother's notebook, which turned out to be one of the most important records because it showed exactly what doctors had said and when Denise pushed against it. Denise was eventually investigated for forgery, attempted fraud, and related offenses involving the falsified medical directive. I will not pretend the legal process was quick or satisfying in every detail. It moved slowly compared with the speed at which she had tried to end my care. But it moved. She faced consequences that affected her job, her reputation, her finances, and her freedom. She also lost access to every family circle that had once tolerated her chaos. My mother refused every call. Callie blocked her. Relatives who initially said things like, "Denise made a terrible mistake," stopped saying it once they understood the timing and the money trail. A mistake is bringing the wrong casserole to a hospital waiting room. A mistake is misremembering a conversation. Creating a legal document, tracing your niece's signature, dating it falsely, and pressuring doctors to withdraw life support while her condition is improving is not a mistake. It is a choice repeated over and over until it reaches someone else's hospital bed. I woke up gradually, not like in movies. There was no dramatic gasp, no instant understanding. My throat hurt. My thoughts came in fragments. My mother looked older than she had a week earlier. Priya cried every time I blinked at her. Nurses asked me simple questions and praised tiny answers. I learned about the accident first. I learned about the collapsed lung, the brain swelling, the surgeries, the ventilator. They did not tell me about Denise right away. Priscilla and my mother agreed that my recovery mattered more than giving me a psychological bomb while I was still weak, confused, and trying to learn how to stand without my blood pressure dropping. So for several days, Denise was simply absent. When I finally asked, "Where is Aunt Denise?" my mother said, "She is not allowed here right now." I was too tired to ask more. Later, in rehab, when I could sit upright for longer and my memory was steadier, my mother told me the whole story. She did it with Priscilla present because she wanted the facts clear and because she was afraid of breaking down. We were in a small rehabilitation room with pale walls and a window facing the parking lot. My left arm was still weak. I had a blanket over my knees. My mother held a folder on her lap like it weighed 50 pounds. She started with the ethics committee. She said the hospital had questioned a directive. I thought she meant a billing form. Then she said Denise submitted it. I remember staring at her, waiting for the sentence to become something else. My mother said, "It claimed you wanted life support withdrawn." I said, "But I never signed one." My voice was rough from the ventilator. Priscilla said, "We know. The document was found to be fraudulent. There is no elegant way to receive the information that someone in your family tried to borrow your handwriting to erase you." At first I felt nothing, which frightened me. Then I felt embarrassed, as if being targeted meant I had been foolish. Then I felt rage so clean it almost steadied me. I asked if doctors had believed it. My mother said they had paused, reviewed, and questioned it because there was no prior directive on file. I asked how close it got. Nobody wanted to answer, but I made them. Priscilla said the document was never acted on, but it created an urgent legal and ethical review during a critical period. That was the lawyer's version. My mother's version came later, when we were alone. She said, "Mara, if the hospital had been careless, if Teresa had not noticed the record issue, if your doctors had thought your prognosis was worse, I do not know what would have happened." That is the sentence I still hear sometimes at night. I do not know what would have happened. Recovery from the accident was hard enough without that knowledge. I had headaches. I had nightmares about being unable to speak. I had weakness on my left side that improved with therapy, but made every staircase feel personal for a while. I had scars along my ribs and hip. I had medical bills, insurance calls, follow-up scans, and months of appointments. But the emotional injury had its own schedule. I became obsessed with signatures. Every time I signed a form, I looked at my name and imagined Denise practicing it. I became anxious around family paperwork. I updated every beneficiary designation with Priscilla's help and removed Denise from anything that even mentioned her. I completed a real advance directive, one with my actual wishes, witnessed properly, filed with my doctors, uploaded to the hospital system, and given to my mother and Priya. I chose my mother as my healthcare agent and Priya as alternate. I wrote specific instructions about prognosis, brain activity, reasonable recovery, and comfort care, because I learned that vague statements can be twisted by people who want them to mean whatever benefits them. Filling out that document was one of the hardest things I have ever done, not because I fear death more now, though maybe I do. It was hard because Denise had taken a tool meant to protect patient dignity and turned it into a weapon. I had to reclaim it as my voice. Marisol visited me once after I was home. She said she did not usually meet the person at the center of a case after the work was done, but my mother thought it might help me to ask questions. Marisol sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once left mail in messy piles, and explained what she had found. She was careful not to dramatize. She told me forged medical directives motivated by financial interest are among the most serious forms of family fraud because they happen when the patient cannot contradict the lie. A forged check can steal money. A forged deed can steal property. A forged medical directive can steal the chance to survive long enough to speak for yourself. She said swift authentication matters because hospitals operate under pressure, families are emotional, and medical windows can close quickly. Then she added, "Your mother saved time by keeping records. That notebook mattered." I looked at my mother, who was making tea at the counter and pretending not to listen, and felt something inside me fold and unfold at once. She had not just sat beside me, she had documented my survival. Denise tried to contact me 3 times after I came home. The first was a letter sent through a relative. I did not read it at first. It sat on my counter for 2 days, a white envelope with my name in handwriting. I suddenly hated. When I finally opened it, it was exactly what I expected, and somehow worse. She wrote that she had been under unbearable stress. She wrote that she believed I would not want to live with severe disability. She wrote that she loved me. She wrote that money had nothing to do with it, then spent 2 paragraphs explaining how financial fear can make people confused. She never wrote, "I tried to have your care withdrawn while doctors saw improvement." She never wrote, "I forged your name." She never wrote, "I was willing to let your mother bury you because I wanted control and possibly money." The closest she came was, "I handled things badly." I gave the letter to Priscilla. The second contact was a voicemail from an unknown number. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. She said, "Mara, please, I need you to understand I thought I was honoring you. I deleted it after saving a copy for the case file." The third was an attempt to approach my mother after church. My mother looked at her and said, "You are not my sister anymore in any way that gives you access to my daughter." Then she got in her car and left. I have replayed that sentence many times. Family is not a lifetime pass to do harm and demand entrance afterward. Some doors close because leaving them open would be another injury. My relationship with Denise is not strained. It is not complicated. It is over. I do not wish her dead. I do not spend my days planning revenge. But I will never sit across from her at a holiday table, never accept an apology that dodges the truth, never let her near my medical information, my home, or my mother. Some betrayals do not ask for repair. They ask for recognition. This was one of them. The legal outcome, when it finally came, was quieter than people might expect. Denise's attorney tried to frame her actions as panic, grief, and misunderstanding. Priscilla and the prosecutor's office pushed back with the timeline. Panic did not explain the newer template dated backward. Grief did not explain tracing a signature from a savings bond form. Misunderstanding did not explain asking about my will before presenting the directive. The forensic evidence was strong. The hospital records were clear. My improving prognosis undermined her claim that everyone knew I was beyond help. Denise ultimately entered a plea that acknowledged the forged document and the attempt to use it in a medical setting. There were penalties, probation terms, restitution for certain investigative costs, and a permanent record that followed her. Some people wanted me to be angry that the punishment was not harsher. Part of me was. Another part of me had learned that legal systems rarely provide emotional symmetry. Nothing a court did could give back the version of me who believed family arguments had limits. Nothing could erase my mother's memory of standing between her daughter and a forged death instruction. Accountability mattered, but it was not the same as restoration. My restoration came in smaller, stubborn ways. The first time I walked around the block without assistance. The first time I drove again, hands shaking on the wheel, Priya in the passenger seat pretending to be calm. The first time I returned to work part-time and my coworkers had decorated my desk with paper cranes and terrible office snacks. The first time I signed my real advance directive and watched the notary stamp it, knowing no one could honestly claim uncertainty about my wishes again. The first time my mother laughed without stopping herself halfway through, as if joy were still allowed. I also changed how I talk about end-of-life planning. Before all this, I thought advance directives were grim paperwork people avoided because death is uncomfortable. Now I think they are also living documents in the deepest sense. They protect your voice when illness or injury takes it away. But they have to be real, accessible, current, and in the hands of people who respect you more than they fear inconvenience or desire money. I tell friends to file copies with their medical systems, not just in drawers. I tell them to choose decision makers for character, not just closeness. I tell them to update beneficiaries after major family changes. I tell them that a vague conversation at Thanksgiving is not a plan. My aunt exploited the gap between what I had casually said and what I had legally completed. I will never leave that kind of gap again. The strangest part is that I sometimes think about the hospital administrator who noticed the form looked wrong. I do not know if she remembers my case. To her, it may have been one troubling document among thousands of pages in a long career. But that flicker of attention mattered. Teresa's caution mattered. Dr. Shaw's clear prognosis mattered. Hugh's expertise mattered. Priscilla's speed mattered. Marisol's digging mattered. Callie's witness statement mattered. My mother's notebook mattered. Survival is often described as one person's fight, but mine was also a chain of people refusing to let a convenient lie outrun the truth. Denise counted on confusion. She counted on grief. She counted on everyone being too overwhelmed to ask whether a piece of paper was real. She nearly chose the perfect moment when I could not open my eyes and say, "That is not mine." But she underestimated my mother, and she underestimated the professionals who understood that a document with life and death power deserves scrutiny. I am fully recovered now in the ways that show up on medical charts. My scans are stable, my lung healed, my strength returned. I work, drive, cook, argue with my mother about whether I am resting enough, and live in the same townhouse I almost never came home to. I still have scars, and I still have moments when a monitor beep in a clinic waiting room makes my chest tighten. But I am here. I am here because a forged directive was questioned before it became an irreversible decision. I am here because my mother refused to confuse speed with mercy. I am here because my own wishes, the real ones, were finally allowed to matter more than my aunt's desperation. If you were in my mother's place, sitting in that hospital room while a relative produced a document that looked almost real, what would you have done first? Would you have confronted her immediately, or would you have waited for proof the way my mother did? Share your thoughts, because stories like mine are not only about inheritance or paperwork. They are about who gets trusted with your voice when you cannot use it. Thank you for listening to what happened to me and to my family. If you want more stories about betrayal, family pressure, legal proof, and people fighting their way back to the truth, subscribe and come back for the next one. Take care of yourself, protect your wishes in writing, and be careful who you allow near the most vulnerable parts of your life.